that Maradona was the greatest football player in the history of the most popular sport in the world. That he was Beethoven, and he was the Beatles, and he was Picasso, and he was Shakespeare, and he was Borges, and he was Joyce, and he was Miles Davis and Bill Evans together.
Mariano Siskind is professor of Romance languages and literatures and of comparative literature at Harvard University. He also knows a lot about sports, particularly soccer. He wrote an article for Revista Sports issue entitled River Plate and the Death of My Sorrow. I understand now that with the death of Diego Maradona, your sorrow has gone even deeper. Welcome, Mariano. Could you please explain to us, who aren't experts on sports, who Diego Maradona was?
Yes, thank you very much for having me and thinking of me for this podcast, June. I am. It's a very sad couple of days for lovers of soccer, of football. Maradona was, in my opinion, the greatest player who ever played the sport of football. Of course, there are endless debates about Maradona and Pele, and now Maradona, Pele, and Messi. For me, as much as I love all great football players, Maradona was by far the best, which is not related to the World Cups or titles that they won or did not win, but an extraordinary aesthetic quality of his game. So the death of Maradona was, it didn't surprise me and many others, but it might have surprised others who are less in touch with the world of football and the world of the social and political and effective meaning that football has for so many around the world. Up until yesterday, 160 newspapers had Maradona in their front pages on Thursday. The death of an athlete, of a sports player, I don't think there are precedents of these, of 160 newspapers around the world having most or the entire front page with different photos of Maradona. That's something that it shows quite exceptional the event of his death was, and I think that it has to do with what he meant and represented beyond the world of football for people, as I said before, both in social and affective ways.
Could you explain that to us? Why was he important in social and effective ways?
Well, it has to be explained in different contexts. why he was important in Argentina and in southern Italy, in Naples, in Napoli in particular. That requires one explanation. Why he was important globally, and why he was important, I would say, for the what it's known as the third world, or the global south. In Argentina and in Italy, particularly in Napoli and in southern Italy, he represented the colors of the Argentinian national jersey and colors of Napoli. He really identified with the teams where he played, in the city in Napoli and the country in Argentina, and he accomplished feats that were unprecedented before. In the case of Argentina, winning the World Cup of 1986 with a performance like it had not been seen since World Cups had been televised. Brazil arguably had the best teams in the history of the World Cup in 62 and in 1970, particularly 1970. Pele was a start in by far the largest star in the world of soccer in the World Cup of 1970. But he was surrounded by at least 5 or 6 of the best players in the world playing for the same team at the same time, winning the World Cup with almost easily, without real competition. What Maradona did in 1986 in the World Cup was the most outstanding individual performance in a team sports. Games and championships are won by teams, not single players. Perhaps with the exception of Argentina in 1986 in Mexico. Maradona not only scored perhaps 3 or 4 of the most beautiful goals scored in the history of the World Cups, but the most important one, the goal of the century, the most amazing goal scored ever in the largest, more meaningful stage. And in the case of Napoli, he won 2 scudetti, 2 Series A titles, 2 Italian titles for Napoli, and 1 UEFA Cup. Napoli had never won anything before him. In Italy is characterized by striking division between north and south, the powerful rich north and the poor relegated south. Maradona identified with the south of like Gramsci, when he wrote the famous essay "The Southern Question" in Italy, identified with the South, became the hero of the poor, relegated South, and defeated the North, the most powerful team of the North, and one of the most powerful in Europe, Juventus, and then Milan, um, to win um, um, to win two titles and European Cup, something that had never been done before, and it didn't occur after Maradona left. But beyond, Maradona was always a very controversial, political, public personality, and outspoken, and proudly aware of his very, very, very poor origins. He was born in a Villa Miseria, in a slum. His family didn't have enough money to feed Maradona's sisters and brothers. He often told the story of how, when he asked his mom why wasn't she eating, she would say that she had already eaten, or she wasn't hungry, but it took him a while to realize that there wasn't enough food for everyone, so she wouldn't eat so the kids could eat. When he was 15 years old, he had his first pro contract in a team of the city of Buenos Aires in Argentinos Juniors. And with the first money he earned, he bought his family a middle-class house in the neighborhood of Paternal, where Argentinos Juniors was. And he was always very aware, very proud, and boastful about his humble, poor, miserable origins. And so he was something that was repeated over and over during these past few days after his death, and during his public funerals, was something like, both in Buenos Aires and in Napoli, no one ever has made us happier than Maradona. We were never, we basically saying something like, we live an unbearably miserable experience with economic crisis after economic crisis in a country or in a region that is always suffering socially, politically, economically, and soccer in general, and Maradona in particular, was the source of our very few moments of happiness. And then globally, of course, the importance of Maradona has to do with the fact that there is something that is often missed in the US. We can talk later if you want about the petty, awful obituary that came out in the New York Times on something that is often missed in the United States, which actually underscores the provincialism that is characteristic of the United States in the world, the way the U.S. misunderstands the world. Football is the most popular sport in the world, and when I say sport, it sounds like something that it may not be important enough. Football is the most popular cultural practice in the world. There's nothing that is more meaningful to more people around the world, particularly the middle and lower classes, but not exclusively, of course, than football. And so Maradona was as a character and as a player, the most, and we can discuss more about this if you want later if there's time. When I teach at Harvard a course on football as popular culture and as in terms of its cultural and political and aesthetic meanings. But of course, it's his death and his figure was important for anyone who was interested in the game. And then finally, sorry, I'm extending myself a little bit here, but for the third world or the global south, Maradona was immediately seen, particularly during the World Cup of 1986, in the famous game between Argentina and England, as an opportunity, as the opportunity that Maradona took to slap a colonial power in the face. It's funny because in England, Maradona is revered. Today, when Manchester City played its game, the goal of the century that was scored against England was played in the stadium big screen after the minute of silence for his death. Maradona is revered. I mean, there's the controversy about the hand of God, and that's interesting in terms of the moralistic ways in which sometimes soccer and human affairs are evaluated. I'm always against moralistic interpretations of culture, politics, society. But one chooses how to read, how to interpret the world. I'm against all forms of moralism. But Maradona was seen across the third world as a hero, precisely for scoring those 2 goals against this former colonial power. The case of Argentina in particular, the game took place 4 years after the Falklands War, La Guerra de Malvinas, but in general, the fact that he got away with scoring a goal with his hand in the most skillful, clever way, so that no one, neither the referee or the linesman notice it, and then scoring the most amazing and wonderful and aesthetic and impossible goal in such a large stage in the quarterfinals of the World Cup, made him immediately. The third world embraced him as one of its own, their own hero, and anyone who has traveled around the global South can testify to saying that one is from Argentina and getting immediately as a response Maradona.
Yeah.
Right. And please welcome. If you're from Maradona's country, then please, all doors would open for you.
Mariano, how does gender fit into all this? You talk about soccer being the most popular sport. How does it play out with gender?
Well, I think that there are different aspects from the perspective of gender in relation to Maradona. I would say that if we're talking about football as a place, as a social cultural site marked by the exclusion of women and the production of forms of toxic masculinity, I think that would be generally correct but slightly dated. Football has changed around the world over the past 20 years. It is still a genderized practice. It is to many extents, although in different parts of the world that's very different, so it would have to be analyzed in particular in each different context. But historically women have been excluded from the practice and the participation in the largest possible sense from the world of soccer. And as I said, over the past 20 years, I think this has changed to a large extent, although it probably need another 20 years of change to make it a place without not so much marked by gender exclusion of women. So that's a long sociologically oriented conversation. The other aspect in the case of Maradona is that Maradona belonged to a social world of where women were excluded from football, and where he and a world that was marked by violence against women. And so there are many reported instances where Maradona was violent against women, which is really bad and unfortunate and disappointing. Um, and but at the same time, the way that I think about it is that Maradona was a very imperfect human being.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, however, that he was as imperfect as most of us. I hate the finger wagging about Maradona, uh, uh, the kind of the morally virtuous discourse around Maradona, saying yes, he was a great player, but he was, and that was exactly, going back to what I was saying before. That was exactly the obituary of the New York Times last Thursday, which I mean, it's surprising to see the New York Times kind of moralizing. The New York Times, the most imperfect of newspapers, who has supported imperialism and bombings and U.S. support of attacks and assassinations around the world, to say, yes, he was a great player, but he's I don't remember what was the exact title, but it was something like, but his legacy was marred by his addiction to drugs and his controversies. And of course, I mean, I couldn't care less about his drug addiction and the kind of the self-inflicted injuries, and how he would have been. This is something that he often said, that imagine how good I would have been if I hadn't been addicted to cocaine. Cocaine didn't help me in the sport. I was giving a handicap when I was playing his addiction began in '84 and went on through his entire life. So when he was the best, when he did things that no one else had done before, he was actually giving his opponents an advantage because he was an addict. It wasn't a performance enhancing drug. So I couldn't care less about his addiction. That is something that it's a disease that millions and millions of people around the world suffer, and I think the moralistic view of drug addiction is incredibly short-sighted and quite mediocre. Now, he had children he didn't recognize until very late in his life. There are incidents reported of violence against women that are despicable, of course. But I think that there are two things that I would say. One is that he was the most human and the most imperfect of gods. And that makes him all the more interesting and all the more as a figure to try to understand and to read and interpret. And the second one, and the one that is the most important for me, an Argentinian Jew who has been in psychoanalysis for the past 35 years or so, is that You don't choose who you love. You love who you love. And you love imperfect people. And that if you think that you can decide who you love and who you don't love, then you don't understand anything about love. And so when we cried for days for his death, and with some of his goals and games, I think that it's just an expression of love for who you love, and not I think that many people will identify with having loved the right people or the wrong people in their lives, and that's, I think, what Maradona means for all of us who cried for him when he died.
Wow. Do you think that his imperfectness is precisely what attract people to him?
Yeah, to some extent, probably. Only to some extent. I think that one can identify with imperfect human beings, but Maradona is way more complex than that. It's not that people admire him because they see themselves in him. That's not true. You don't see yourself in a god, in a human imperfect god, but a god nevertheless. I think that there's something that we do in our class on soccer. I teach one class on Maradona, and I read the class that's called the Global Game, Soccer, Popular Culture, and Politics. In that class, one of the things that I do, the whole class is meant to be an introduction to the humanities for students who usually or that sometimes reject the humanities and go to classes of social sciences and the sciences and technology. And so it's a typical class of humanities where we think about philosophy and literature and film and art and aesthetics and ethics through soccer. So soccer is the way in which we kind of attract students to show them what the humanities does as a lens to read the world, anything really. He is not forgiven sometimes that coming from the lowest, poorest socioeconomical world ascended to the highest possible place of this human demigod, and that he did that bringing the culture of the lower classes, the abject, I don't know how to say this word in English, plebeyo, amoral, not immoral, but amoral worldview of those whose life is determined by the need of having to survive day to day. And the objection that has to do with the complete erasure of the moralistic limit between and border between good and evil. So Maradona was a figure who did not embrace a middle class bourgeois moralistic view of life. And I think that is something that is typical of the lower classes, and that is something that many people can't forgive him or forgive in his figure. And they are a bit more comfortable if turning a blind eye when they think about Picasso or Beethoven or John Lennon. But he was Picasso and John Lennon and Beethoven and Miles Davis and etc. Then the other thing that we do is something that in relation to these precisely is that my students read a fragment of Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy to think about Maradona, right? And to think about, because in The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche proposes two opposing figures to think about human nature. One is the figure of Apollo, the god of poetry, the god of light, of well-being, the balance between the reason and affect, the self-control, the social order, being measured and containing wilder impulses. And Nietzsche opposes, and he identifies the figure of Apollo with the state of the world, the state, modernity, the Enlightenment, and he opposes to Apollo the figure of Dionysus, and Dionysus, the god of carnival, of festivity, of wine, of dance and music, of madness, of unrestrained sex and intoxication and uncontrolled freedom, and everything that lies beyond reason, right? So, on the one hand, the Apolline as the thinking versus the Dionysiac feeling. Apolline self-control versus the Dionysiac passion. Apolline calm reason and rationality versus the Dionysiac instinct and ecstasies and chaos and destruction. And so for Nietzsche, Dionysus is a figure of Apollo is a figure of morality, order and morality, and Dionysus is the figure of amorality, of the freedom from morality, and the good and the bad that comes when in the realm of pure feeling and passion and wine, and most important of all, excess. And so I propose that Maradona is a perfect embodiment of the Nietzschean idea of the Dionysiac in culture. So important. Imagine if we lived in a world of purely ruled by Apollo, by order and reason and morality and so on and so forth. And so we have these excessive, chaotic forces of creative destruction or destructive creation that break all molds and liberate us, or let's put it differently, allows us to imagine or to live vicariously forms of excessive freedom that produces new forms of meaning, of social, cultural meaning. So I propose that Maradona is one of these historical figures. And the other thing that I propose in the course is that precisely because of these, Maradona can be read through the notion of the classical tragic hero. So my students read the chapter on tragedy from Aristotle's Poetics. So we try to understand the figure of Maradona, and it's quite amazing because in tragedy, first you have the establishment of the heroicity of the hero. You know, the hero is precisely like Maradona, the figure of a demigod, is the son of a god and a human. So a demigod, a human god. And so there's a period in Maradona's life where he establishes his heroicity. I would say that's 1979, 1990, right? The kind of the classical Maradona, the moment when he emerges and wins the Youth World Cup in 1979 and becomes immediately the promise of the future of football. Then, you know, plays in Argentinos Juniors, in Boca, in Barcelona, arrives in Napoli, becomes the hero of this relegated poor South, wins the World Cup of '86, wins two national titles in Italy and one European Cup, then plays the World Cup in Italy in 1990, where Argentina, he's injured and plays, you know, there's this classical photo of Maradona's ankle swollen like grapefruit, and after each of his games there, so the heroicity of it. And you know, he together with Canigia, they eliminate Brazil with one amazing goal that Maradona crafted, and then Canigia scored, and then eliminates Italy, the host nation, who was destined to win its own World Cup, in Napoli, in his own stadium. And the Napoli fans, the Italian fans from the city, crying because they were torn between their own god playing against his national team. So the whole setting of this tragedy, and then Argentina loses the final of the World Cup against Germany with a penalty that was kind of invented by the World Cup. I think that was, FIFA is a very corrupt Maradona had denounced the leaders of FIFA over and over again between 86 and 90. FIFA hated Maradona. Germany had just been reunified in 89, and the plot line was that Germany had to win the World Cup. The game was awful. Germany was awarded a penalty kick that was totally made up, didn't exist, and Germany won the World Cup. Maradona cried. Maradona insulted the Italian fans when they booed the Argentinian national anthem. So the establishment of Maradona's heroicity, 79, 1990, and then the tragedy, Maradona's tragic hero begins in 91 when he's suspending for taking cocaine, for testing positive from cocaine, and goes on. Then he's disqualified from the World Cup of 94, also because of his addiction, and until his death. And so what we do in the course is that we read the important the way in which Aristotle conceptualizes this downfall of the tragic hero. First the notion of peripateia, which is the hero's reversal of fortune that is brought about by what Aristotle calls amartia. Amartia is it's an error in judgment by the hero, or by hubris, the excessive pride, and finally the moment that it's called anagnoresis. Anagnoresis is the moment when the hero of recognition and acknowledgement by the tragic hero that the downfall was caused by his own actions. And that is a beautiful moment in Maradona when he has his tribute game, his goodbye game in the stadium of his team in Argentina, in Boca Juniors, La Bombonera. And at the end of the game, he has this beautiful poetic, because that's the other thing, that he always crafted these poetic, epigrammatic phrases that remain in the popular consciousness. And he said, I made mistakes and I paid a high price for them, but la pelota no se mancha, right? But the ball is never stained. And so that moment of recognition, of acknowledging that his own excessive pride and errors of judgment, right, amartia and hubris, brought him down, this moment of peripateia, and so I think all these things, the Dionysiac figure, the hero's tragic fall, and being Beethoven, being the Beatles, being Shakespeare, these are the things that made people love him and admire him so much. Not so much his imperfections. Yes, by all means, they play a role there, but I think is this complex and this much tied into the narrative ways in which we understand the world for centuries and centuries. That's why he's so important.
You've talked a lot about aesthetics. Do you want to address that for a minute?
Yeah, right. Yes. Well, in English, football is known as the beautiful game. So I think aesthetics is, well, I'm a professor of literature and culture. So of course, I think aesthetics is absolutely central to an understanding of the world. And there's something about football, I think all sports, and I think life in general, but let's stay within the realm of football. Football is a performed art. It's like the performing arts. In football, there's the bodily plasticity, interpretation, movement, imagination. In football, there are scripts for secondary actors, for secondary players. There are role players in football. In '86, for instance, in every team Maradona played, but in the World Cup of 1986, the manager, the coach of Argentina's team, was this hyper cerebral defensive genius called Carlos Salvador Bilardo, and Bilardo had invented a new formation that didn't exist, at least in world football up to that point. And so every player in the team had a very much rehearsed role to play. There was a script for them, but not for Maradona, not for Diego. For Diego was, you improvise, you do whatever you want. Everyone had a script except for him. So in his case, it was this imagination, corporal plasticity plus contingency. It's wonderful. I recommend anyone who's interested to see the way he explains the goal of the century, which lasts, I think, 10 seconds, the whole run, and what he thought and what he did and what he decided to do at each moment of these 10 seconds of his run between midfield and scoring the goal. And that's a true definition of genius. But genius in the moment of the performance. It's not like people like me who write. And so you write the sentence and then you erase it. And then you write it again, and then you correct it. And then, until you're happy with this verse or with this sentence or with this idea. In the performing arts, every performance is different. It's the moment. And it differentiates the geniuses and the excellent players. And so, there's a lot more to say about aesthetics, but I think that there's a famous anecdote of Piazzolla, who didn't like soccer, didn't like football, but he was once in I think in Paris, and Napoli was playing against probably Paris Saint-Germain, and um, and Maradona got the ball and did one of these amazing gratuitous plays. Because I mean, you don't need to be beautiful to play beautifully to win a game. The aesthetic nature is always a form of excess, of surplus, right? But that was always for Maradona. So Maradona did one of these wonderfully plastic moves and plays, and it is said that Piazzolla stood up in his seat and he shouted, "You are Nijinsky!" Because that's exactly right. I mean, it is just like the most amazing, impossible ballet dancers. I mean, it's just to make to. And in the case of Maradona, and in the case of geniuses, like I said before, Nijinsky or Beethoven or the Beatles, or it's these, or Picasso's Guernica or Le Demoiselle d'Avignon, is this aesthetic form that goes beyond the beautiful, that Immanuel Kant calls the sublime, which is a moment that it's not just beauty, what you're witnessing, but something that is beyond comprehension, and that is so strikingly strong, the feeling that you have for that beautiful event that you're witnessing, that for a moment your whole subjectivity decomposes, is undone for a moment. You are undone in front of the sublime. You're transformed. You witnessed something that is an aesthetic, secular form of the divine. And I think that applies to Maradona. I mean, and anyone who watched Maradona can understand what I'm saying. Yeah.
Mariano, as I listen to you explain this in terms of aesthetics and the sublime, I'm thinking back to our brief conversation when I set up this interview, and you said that you've been crying nonstop for 2 days.
Yes.
Have you stopped crying?
No, I haven't. I've been watching and reading kind of obsessively, and what I try to do is to think about. I'm totally shocked and surprised about my emotional reaction to the death of Diego. And so my sons have come to me and said, like, what's wrong? And my wife saying, come on, okay, a little bit I understand, but that's probably too much. and it wasn't just me. It's not everyone, but I know lots of people who've been crying for days since we heard of the news of Maradona's passing. And I think it has to do. So I try to think what is it about my own tears, my excessive reaction to his death, and about the public tears, like the people crying in the public sphere, in the crying at the center of the polis. And I think that we are mourning something that is larger than just the figure of Maradona. We are probably mourning a world that is lost to us, a world of certain possibilities and experiences that in the 80s we still thought it was possible. And I think that Maradona produced or was the catalyst for an experience of the common, of community, which is impossible. How can you be in communion with a nation or with the world? And I think that in those brief moments, different moments between 79 and 90, or between 86 and 90, and it's not the whole time, it's these flashes of the possibility of something impossible, of the turning possible of the impossible, that Maradona opened up for millions and millions of people around the world. And we don't have anything like that today. I would say that is gone, that is lost to us, that and also the idea of I could go on, but Maradona was Maradona represented for very brief moments, like the other geniuses that I mentioned before, the possibility of the impossible. And that has very important political and subjective implications. And I think we are mourning and crying over the loss of the rendering possible of the impossible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, June.
You've been listening to Mariano Siskind. He's professor of Romance languages and literatures and of comparative literature at Harvard University. He also teaches a course on football. Thank you for being with us, Mariano.
Thank you, June.